Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fantasy Roundup for Wednesday, January the 18th. I'm Zach Ewing with Spencer the Guru Urquhart, with you a day later than usual, again because of the holiday on Monday. But we are here and we are ready to talk. We're going to go through our final 2022 fantasy football rankings. We got some DFS and prop plays to talk about for the divisional playoffs this weekend, and for the first time in a long time, Spencer, we're going to talk about something other than fantasy football. We'll take a peek at your midseason fantasy basketball rankings.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, I'm excited. This is a cool time of year. Football's just wrapping up it wrapped up for season-long regular leagues, but they still got a lot of playoff action, DFS, props, for degenerates like me, playoff leagues, so there's a lot going on. And of course, fantasy basketball, hot and heavy, and in fantasy baseball in a couple months. So yeah, we've still got a lot to talk about. I'm excited.
Absolutely. And we'll also, by the way, I did not mention, we will also talk about your way too early 2023 fantasy football
Oh
rankings.
yeah.
So
Oh
looking
yeah.
forward to that as well. For those of you who didn't get it done this year in season long, we can already look forward to next year. So jam-packed half hour in front of us. If you have any questions or comments about DFS this weekend, about your best ball lineups, how your season went, any of that, feel free to leave them in the comments. Except if you're on the Twitter feed, we cannot see those comments. So you'll have to get over to the Bayou Bets YouTube page for that. And while you're over there on the Bayou Bets YouTube page, hit that like button for us, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Tell your friends about us, share the video if you like our content, and just generally help us out on that. We are brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook, the official odds partner of bet.NOLA.com and Bayou Bets. We have a special offer just for our listeners right now. LSUposter.com. Get 3 free championship posters, all for just placing a $10 bet or more. For new users only on Caesars. New users, $10 minimum bet. You get a 3 poster set. That's a $75 value. And honestly, the $75 sets that we sell, you have to take the 3 that we put in that set. Here you get to pick your 3. So pretty good deal. Spencer, we'll talk some final rankings first. Let's go through the different positions as we get going on the fantasy roundup, starting with the quarterbacks. And if you pay attention to the point totals, you'll see quarterbacks just score more than other spots. However, if you didn't have one of the top, let's say 4 guys, we'll go all the way down to Burrow. Look at that drop off. And then it's all very close together between everybody else. So is there really a huge advantage? This is why you don't draft one real early unless you can get one of those top 4 guys.
100%, yeah. Because if you didn't have Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, or Burrow, chances are you were streaming, playing the waiver wire with quarterbacks. So assuming you're in a single quarterback league, which is what I did in our Bayou Bets listener league. I streamed early on. I drafted Matthew Stafford, so that didn't work out. Complete bust. So then at that point, all right, I got to pivot, try to stream, and so then I started streaming. Dak Prescott when he came back. I think I may have had Brady for a week or something. Daniel Jones just streaming. And then I found Justin Fields, and it turned out Justin Fields was a really reliable option. And then when he got injured, Trevor Lawrence was floating out there on the waiver wire. Picked up Trevor Lawrence whenever Fields couldn't go for that week. So yeah, there's usually options to be had on the wire. So unless you can get one of those elite options, don't spend up for like a Stafford, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, those veterans that used to be elite that still get drafted in the middle rounds. I would just steer clear of that. Keep stacking depth and try and get one. Or Geno Smith, another example of one you could have gotten off the waiver wire. So there's usually a lot of surprises at this position.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, even if you do get an elite guy, I had a league where I drafted Lamar Jackson and got him pretty early, end of the 5th round, beginning of the 6th round, I think. And he gets hurt. And so then you're sort of scrambling. Luckily enough, in that league, I had just picked up Fields. I can't remember if I just liked him or if the Ravens bye week was coming up, but whatever the case was, he was a ready-made replacement for Lamar Jackson, put him in there and did just fine. So, yeah, if you don't have a top guy, it can get, really just thrown in a hat and pick one out. So, and even if you do, obviously injuries happen. Speaking of injuries, they had a big impact on the primary positions in fantasy football in the past year. We'll start with running backs. Austin Eckler emerges as the top one. And here again, you kind of see these big gaps. And this is why you do oftentimes like to spend an early pick on a running back because, you see that 16-point gap between Eckler and McCaffrey, then a 28-point gap between McCaffrey and Jacobs, another 26-point gap. Of course, Derrick Henry may have been closer had he played that last game. Then another big gap to Saquon Barkley and Nick Chubb, and then another big gap before you kind of get to everybody else. And so you can really separate yourself by getting one of these studs.
For sure, yeah. So that's we'll see in my 2023 ranks. I've still got, even though I've got a lot of receivers up there, I still got Eckler and CMC in the top 3 because you can get that huge positional advantage there. And then Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, even though they don't catch a lot of passes, they're so strong as runners to where they're elite assets as well. Saquon, a nice bounce back for him. He was someone that is he still an elite running back? He had that great rookie year and then had battled injuries a lot. Is he still capable of putting up big numbers? And this year he proved that in a contract year. Him and Josh Jacobs might be changing teams next year, although I would think the Giants and Raiders would make it a priority to bring them back considering how successful they were.
Yeah, another guy on there who's going to be a free agent is Tony Pollard of the Cowboys, who, I know a lot of people in the preseason said, hey, I'm going to pick Tony Pollard. I got scared off, and it's one of my regrets because of the timeshare with Zeke. But Tony Pollard was just plain and simple better this year, and that's even with Zeke getting the goal line work.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, Pollard, man, he took over as their go-to running back, I'd say, because he's just a lot more explosive and just better, just all around, the better all-around back. Kind of like with the Patriots, Ramondre Stevenson took over as their main guy instead of Damian Harris. So, yeah, definitely try to keep up with the trends, see who's trending up, who's trending down. Like, I know Leonard Fournette backdoor to top 12 finish there, but as we saw down the stretch, Rachaad White is looking like the back to have there in Tampa Bay.
And you look at the bottom of this list, there's a guys, Kenneth Walker didn't play much the first few weeks, so he didn't make this list. Damian Pierce got hurt, and so he didn't make this list. But they're examples of guys you could have gotten late, and that's why I really am a proponent of what they call the hero RB strategy, where go get one of these stars, and you hope he stays healthy and he can win a league for you and really anchor your lineup every week. But after that, once you start getting into the RB2 mix, there's just as good of a chance that a Tony Pollard or a Damian Pierce or a Kenneth Walker is going to be just as good as a guy you'd be drafting, like Leonard Fournette or even Dalvin Cook or Joe Mixon, who were borderline RB1s. A lot of times those guys just don't separate from the field enough.
Right, yeah, they didn't really deliver. A lot of people took Mixon and Cook in the back half of the first thing, and they could be that hero RB. So there's a chance you could find that there. I mean, Derrick Henry was that for most of the way. I mean, Josh Jacobs, you could have gotten in the 4th, 5th round, and he'd have lived up to that. So like, this position is very tough to predict. Probably more so than receiver. With receiver, you have like your 5 or 6 elite, and you're like, what they're gonna do at running back. You've got CMC, Eckler, and I guess you could throw Henry in that mix. But outside of that, it's like, I mean, we don't know. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, we all thought was going to be elite, and then he gets hurt and has a dud year. So it's a tough position to predict.
Very good point. Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift was a first rounder for a lot of people or at least a second rounder who didn't pan out either. So what I want to do, take one more look at the running back board. Pay attention to the point totals here. So we range from 372 but quickly get down toward 300 and then down under 250 by the bottom of this list. The wide receivers, this is a little bit higher, right? Like the top is similar, 368 to 372, but it stays above 300 longer. We have A.J. Brown there at number 6, who's basically at 300, and we're still above 250 as we get to the bottom of the list. And this is where when you really build the depth of your team, at least for this year, and I think it's been a trend for multiple years, that depth, those 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks, those ought to be receivers. You're going to get more points from those guys than you are from your RB2.
Right, yeah, especially in these PPR leagues, it's like the sharps in there. They tend to just stack receivers. I'm like, man, you got like no quarterback, no tight end, no running back depth, but all these receivers. But that's, as I've played more and more leagues, that seems to be the wave, because with these guys, if you could get like, let's just say a Diggs in round 2, Lamb round 3, Waddle round 4, Devontae Smith round 5 or 6. I mean, guys, a Kirk you could have gotten like in 7 or 8. I mean, you could have stacked the deal like that. You could have so many stud receivers plus trade pieces at that point. You can't start all 4 or 5 of those, but if you accumulate those guys that are scoring a lot of points, then you're playing from ahead. Then you can make moves and fill the spots that you're kind of weak at. You can, fill your RB2 on the wire, stream tight ends. But if all you're missing is that elite QB, then you can go ahead and trade that Devontae Smith piece for maybe like a Jalen Hurts type, or him and one other piece. I mean, people aren't going to just give you Jalen Hurts for cheap, but if you have a lot of depth, you can use that to cash in and have a pretty stacked team.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to tight ends, this is the one spot where, look, there was one guy and one guy only, and obviously everybody had to start somebody. And so if you didn't have Kelsey, it was great to have T.J. Hockenson or George Kittle or Evan Ingram. But the problem is, if you spent a high round pick, and Kelsey was worth it, but Mark Andrews was not. He just simply did not separate from the rest of the tight end field here. Where if you used an early round, top 5 round pick on Mark Andrews, you really hurt yourself, because you could have had, Evan Ingram literally 10 rounds later and gotten almost as much production, or Tyler Higbee or Pat Freiermuth, Cole Kmet. I mean, those guys a little bit lower, but you could have used that 5th round pick instead on another receiver or running back.
For sure. Yeah, those mid-round tight ends didn't pan out. The one regret I have is I thought Dalton Schultz might have a year to where he might separate a little bit, finish like around where Hockenson did. So Hockenson was the one that, if you'd take a tight end in the mid-rounds, would have panned out. But Schultz, I thought he would be the one. It didn't work. The one, though, that I was right about to stay away from was Darren Waller. I mentioned that in my column last week. Waller, he was someone that used to be elite and was still going in the mid rounds, but obviously didn't pan out between injuries and just poor performance. So yeah, outside of Travis Kelce, who's definitely a first rounder, there's no doubt about that. Yeah, he's a tight end, but he gives you such a positional advantage. You got to take him there because hardly anybody else is dependable.
Yeah, I mean, look, is his point total as high as the other first rounders? Not quite, but he produced 100-point advantage over any other tight end. 100 points. I mean, do the math over 16 weeks of the season, and you're talking about more than 6 points a week. You think that doesn't make a difference in fantasy football? Now, is it always going to be 100 points? No, but that's why you spend that first round pick on Travis Kelce and hope that you have a huge advantage. Now, having said that, Travis Kelce can get hurt just like anybody else. I was surprised to see how low Schultz and Dallas Goedert both were. But then you think back on it, and they spent some time on the shelf early in the year. And so they were fairly reliable when they came back, but you missed those 4, 5, 6 games, and now, all of a sudden those guys can hurt you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's just, it's this position. Unless you have Kelsey, it's probably worth a lot of times just streaming, because if you streaming, then you could have gotten Evan Ingram late, and then he could have, he did really good down the stretch there. So yeah, don't stress too much about tight end. It's a roulette wheel. You just gotta hope you can play the wire and find the one that's trending up. Go with the trends. Everyone trends differently throughout the year, so just hope you can find one that's trending up and can stay on that wave.
Absolutely. You're watching the Fantasy Roundup on bet.NOLA.com and the Bayou Bets YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe to our channel. We'll be back tomorrow live at 4 o'clock for the next episode of Bayou Bets. Spencer, I think you're off for the weekend, though, aren't you? Taking a little
yeah. I got another wedding, this weekend. So
not his wedding, by the way. Not
right. Yeah. Well, buddies. Yeah. No, not getting married yet. No, I'm so
he's still available. Okay. Just throwing that out there. All right.
If you're listening, ladies.
so he'll be he won't be here tomorrow, but Jim and I will be back along with Gabe Henderson, and we'll be joined by Max Meyer of Caesars Sportsbook, their trend officer. That's 4 o'clock tomorrow. We'll be talking divisional playoff games. Here's a rundown of the board, and these odds have been pretty static. The Bills actually popped up to 5.5-point favorites earlier today, and then quickly went back to 5. I think that line has finally reached its limit. But from a fantasy perspective, as we dig into these games, Spencer, not so many games to choose from, only 4. Most DraftKings and FanDuel slates, you'll play both games on Saturday and both games on Sunday. So you have all 4 games to choose from. The strategy changes a little bit, though. You can't go find that pivot because there's only 4 teams. I mean, everybody is going to be anybody worth owning is going to be at least 10% owned. So you have to kind of change your strategy a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it is going to go with what I feel is I don't probably worry too much about the ownership because, like you said, a lot of people are pretty much everyone's going to be owned in a decent percentage of leagues. So I just kind of went with, I looked at the game scripts or how I think the game scripts are going to go, looked at the trends to try to determine who I think is going to do well in these spots and just kind of went with guys that I feel are going to do well and also have value. And
Yeah, and
it's just
that's really the key. I mean, I think you hit on it, right? Is if ownership is going to be flatter across the board, if everybody is going to be, there's just not going to be anybody who's 2% owned unless you're going and playing, third string tight ends or somebody and just hoping something crazy happens and they catch a touchdown pass. So what you have to do instead is imagine a game script in your head for one of these games or two of these games. And then if you're exactly right, you hit every part of it and say, okay, well, this team's going to have the lead and they're going to be running and this team's going to be behind and they're going to be throwing and chasing them down. Imagine if you had the Jaguars offense last week. Trevor Lawrence threw 4 interceptions. He was still a great quarterback to have in daily fantasy because of all those yards and all those touchdowns. Christian Kirk was great to have. Zay Jones was great to have. And so you can kind of, if you hit on that game script, you were in really good shape. And then the Cowboys running game, let's say they had the lead the whole time. If you hit on that game script, Tony Pollard was great to have. And if you can nail all of them, that's how you win these GPPs. So Spencer, here is your best values for the divisional round.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going with Burrow here as my quarterback because I feel like him and Josh Allen are going to duke it out. Really like the over in that game. I think that's going to be a shootout. So I'm going to go with Burrow here because he's cheaper than Allen and Mahomes. They're the top two way up there over, I think, like 7,000, 8,000. A little too expensive to me to really have value. Or Burrow, still a pretty good value there. It's 6,500. Stacked him there with Hayden Hurst, the cheap tight end option. They got a pretty good amount of quality tight ends left. But I feel like Hurst was the best value because you can get him cheaper than any of the other ones. And he's been getting a pretty decent target share. Yeah, they've got Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. But outside of them, they don't have much else. So Hurst seems to be the guy that gets like the leftover 5 or 6 targets. And then Miles Sanders, good matchup against the Giants. He ran all over them in the first Eagles-Giants matchup, and I think he'll do the same there in what I think will be an Eagles blowout. And then Debo, I believe, was my receiver. I feel like Debo can still put up elite numbers, and you can get him a lot cheaper than the likes of Diggs, Chase, or C.D. Lamb. I think those were the 3 that were priced way up there, and A.J. Brown. Still a lot of elite ones, but to me, Debo was the best value.
Yeah, 5,900 for Debo seems real cheap. I will say this, and he's not the guy that I chose for my value, but if you were looking for a quarterback to pivot, because I think you're right, a lot of people are going to play Josh Allen, a lot of people are going to play Patrick Mahomes, and I think a lot of people will play Joe Burrow because he is cheaper. People look at those offenses and their eyes light up. Jalen Hurts, I think he had a huge game against the Giants the first time the teams played. Not quite as much in week 18 because he's still kind of coming back from that shoulder injury. Now, there's a chance he's not 100% and that shoulder is still bothering him and they won't be running him and all these things. And if that's the case, well, in these DFS tournaments, if you finish 10,000th or 5,000th, who really cares? I mean, okay, you rolled the dice. But if he's healthy and other people are scared off by him, and he does run, and he does have one of these big Jalen Hurts-esque days, because the Giants' defense is gettable. I mean, let's face it, they're gettable. Then you can really separate yourself. But he's not the guy I picked. He wouldn't really have value. You do pay up a little bit more for him. I went with Trevor Lawrence, and this is where we talk about game script. And if the Chiefs hop out to a lead against the Jaguars, which is what I anticipate will happen as I imagine this game script. Could be wrong, but that's what I'm going to go with. Jerick McKinnon becomes a good play for the Chiefs. He's going to get some carries. Isaiah Pacheco, not a bad look either, but when the Chiefs need to get first downs or they get in those 2-minute situations, McKinnon is still going to get a lot of work in the passing game. He's 6,000 flat. And then on the other side, Trevor Lawrence chasing again. What did he do last week when he was chasing against the Jaguars? He gave 13 targets to Zay Jones. Christian Kirk is the number one receiver there in Jacksonville, but Zay Jones was a target hog when Jacksonville fell behind. You can get him for 4,700. So I'm going there. And then tight end, kind of playing off of Hurts. I went with Dallas Goedert. just seem priced kind of low. Giants don't defend tight ends real well. And so I go with Goddard at 4,500.
For sure. Yeah, the Lawrence Zay Jones stack looks pretty nice there, especially from a value perspective, because I think that game will be kind of. I think it could be a little bit of back and forth. I don't think the Chiefs. I know you had said, Zach, that the Chiefs would probably blow the doors off Jacksonville, or I think the Eagles game is going to be the blowout. I think that Jags Chiefs game could be somewhat back and forth, but either way, Lawrence and Zay Jones are in a good spot, considering that the Chiefs defense is just it's just not very good. I mean, it's just not as. That's why I'm not as on the Chiefs, because their defense isn't, to me, on the level of Buffalo or Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, look, my idea is that the Chiefs get out to a lead here, but I think this game script works even if it is back and forth, like you said. I mean, Jacksonville knows they're going to have to put up points to win this game. You want to win this game, you probably need at least 28 points. That game has the highest total of any of the 4 games. It's at 53. So to win, you need 27 points, right? But judging by a 53-point total, and so both these teams know they're going to have to put up points. They're both going to go for it. Neither one of them's super conservative. And that game has a total 5 points higher than any other. Bengals Bills is at 48, Giants Eagles at 48, and then Cowboys Niners down at 46. And I said this yesterday in the show too. I actually think that Bills Bengals game, as much as you think shootout in your head, those teams tend to go on long drives. The defenses, as you mentioned, are probably better than the Chiefs are. And if one team does get out to a lead, they can both run the ball. They're going to try to shorten that game a little bit. I don't know that one gets up into the 35 to 27 type range. I think Chiefs Jaguars a much better bet for a high scoring game, whether it's the Chiefs kind of keeping the Jags at arm's distance, or whether it's, like you said, back and forth and just a traditional shootout. I see that one as the one to target.
As opposed to Bills Bengals.
Yeah, as opposed to any of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Vegas has that as the highest total. Yeah, the Jags. Yeah, I was just going through the totals. I think that was at 53, and then the Eagles Giants and Bills Bengals was 48, and Cowboys Niners the lowest at 46. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what the odds makers are thinking. Chiefs Jags, which I think it'll be that, but I feel like Allen Burrow. Like I don't know, they have good defenses, but I feel like that's just going to be a showcase of 2 titans, 2 gladiators ready to show what they can do, to where I feel like the defenses aren't going to have too many answers. So, yeah, those AFC games, watch out. There's a lot of points there.
And you could be right, but that's what I'm saying is like that Allen versus Burrow, everybody's eyes light up. And in DFS, everyone's going to go to that game.
Yeah, that's true.
I might pivot. Everybody's high priced there. Hey, it might be
Burrow,
time to pivot from that one.
Burrow and Lawrence to me are the best values, because it's like Allen Mahomes. that's as Jim's, as Joe Q Public, Aunt Mabel, like all the casual fans are gonna be like, well, I've got to have Mahomes or Allen anchoring my DFS. Where if you can get just as good numbers from Burrow and Lawrence, and also have some elite receivers and running backs, that's what I would do.
All right, we're going to talk basketball to wrap up the show, but first I want to look ahead. Next fantasy season, it'll be here before you know it. We'll have the NFL draft. We'll talk about rookies, all that sort of stuff. By the way, our plan on the Fantasy Roundup, we're going to be with you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock as usual, and then we will also be with you the Tuesday of Super Bowl week as usual. Might actually push that one to Wednesday. We'll let you know, just so that more props are available, because that episode will be heavy on props. But then we're going to take a little bit of a break. We will be back to talk fantasy baseball preview. We'll be back after the NFL draft to talk about the impacts of different teams, and then we'll get back with you in the summertime. So we will stay with you for at least a couple more weeks here during football season. But speaking of props, Spencer, before we get to next year's rankings, any props catch your eye this weekend that you'll be betting on?
Oh yeah, they have some. I was trying to figure out my best values for my props column here, and I feel like Josh Allen's a good value for passing. They didn't price him up too high. Mahomes, it's way too high. I mean, to bet the over, I wouldn't want to bet the under though, because we know Mahomes is capable of throwing for 350 or 400 yards. But Allen's prop is only at 266.5, to where 267 or more it hits. So I kind of like his over for passing, and also like Trevor Lawrence's over. His is only 249.5, which I feel is
really
like
good. That.
Yeah, I feel like that's a value there, and not too much on rushing. Rushing, I didn't find a whole lot of values. I did like the CMC was only 65.5 over for his rushing yards. I mean, that's a good value against the Dallas defense that, yeah, they did good against Tampa Bay, but down the stretch, they were pretty inconsistent, especially against the run. And then Zeke's total, not very high, only 34.5, but against the Niners, brick wall, to me, the under's a pretty good play on that.
Yeah, Zeke is looking. If you're the Cowboys and you're in a do or die game, give the ball to Tony Pollard.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
like I don't want to bag on the guy. He's had a good career, but Zeke, he just feels washed up. Still gets the goal line work, obviously, but I don't. Maybe he gets a touchdown, 40+ yards. He's gonna have to bust one. Is he gonna bust one
Yeah,
against
he
that
ain't
Niners
busting it.
defense?
No, I
I
think
don't.
that's
I
a
don't.
good value.
I would bet against it. I would bet
Yeah,
against that.
yeah.
Um,
And in the receiving yards, there's a lot for that. I haven't even determined yet my top picks for that because I feel like all these guys should go over. I'm gonna have to study the cornerbacks a little bit here before I pick my top 2 for the column. But I mean, shoot, Christian Kirk's over looks good, 63.5. Zay Jones, 54.5. Diggs, 81.5. Gabe Davis, 56.5. AJ Brown, 69.5. Devontae Smith, 63.5. To me, all those look pretty good, but yeah, I'll have to do a little more cornerback research there and pick out my top 2 for the column because, yeah, those all look like they should go over, but have to see who's going to be guarding them most likely and all that.
Spencer's prop column with his top picks of the week hits every Friday morning on bet.nola.com. No exception for the playoffs. We will have the prop column for you Friday morning, both in the print edition of the Times-Picayune and Advocate and on bet.nola.com. All right, it is now time. The 2023 way too early fantasy rankings with all the traditional caveats. We don't know where everybody's even going to be playing. We don't know draft picks. We don't know if free agency could definitely change things. But as of right now, here is what Spencer the Guru is thinking for your 2023 first round picks.
For sure. Yep. Going with CMC at the top. Now that he's a Niner, he had a resurgence. His career had been, I wouldn't say on the decline, but he had been battling injuries year after year with the Panthers, and it was just kind of a dull offense. But the 49ers, an elite offense, he seems to have gotten over the injuries that plagued him the years prior. It was like a lot of soft tissue stuff, nothing like torn ACL or something super serious. So, yeah, CMC should have another elite season in him. And then Austin Eckler, didn't have him at number 1. I think he'll still have a nice year, but it's just hard to replicate that. Usually the guy that finishes 1 the year before doesn't finish 1 the next year, but I still think he'll do well. Got him there at 3. And then Justin Jefferson at 2. I still think he'll finish as the overall number 1 receiver. Him and Jamar Chase, man, they're just scratching the surface of what they're capable of. Those 2 guys, the LSU boys, so fun to watch. And then Stephon Diggs, Travis Kelce, couple safe bets there. And in the second half here, Cooper Kupp, a little risky. Not sure what the Rams are going to look like, but assuming Stafford comes back and McVay's back, he announced that he's going back. The offense should still be solid, and Kupp was able to thrive when healthy, even with the dumpster fire around him. So to me, he's still a first rounder. Saquon might be in a new home depending on how free agency goes, but no matter where he lands, he should be a first rounder there, elite running back. Tyreek Hill proved that he can thrive outside of Kansas City. Same with Devontae Adams, thriving outside of Green Bay. JT, Jonathan Taylor, I think will bounce back. Hopefully the Colts can bring in a competent quarterback. But no matter who they bring in, they'll be a run-heavy team. And then Travis Etienne, just scratching the surface there. I think he's going to take a big step forward in what will be year 3, really year 2, though, because he didn't play at all his rookie year.
Yeah, very interesting. And it's those guys, that stick out to you, Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp, who missed significant portions of this season with injury and really disappointed. But you know who that described last year? Christian McCaffrey turned into a league winner this year. And so it's still worth using an early pick on those guys. Anybody can get injured. Austin Eckler had an injury history and was sort of known as this guy who couldn't stay healthy just 2 years ago. And he's been a league winner the last 2 years. So you can't really shy away from that. You have to take those chances. And yeah, sometimes it's going to burn you, but sometimes it's also going to win you the league. And at the Fantasy Roundup, as I'm sure you are at home, we're not in this thing to take 4th place, okay? We're in it to win it. We're not in here to like make the semifinals and lose twice. Like that no. We want a winning team, and we want you to have a winning team. So stick with us. We'll have prop work and DFS work for the conference championships next week and for the Super Bowl. I guess that's in 3 weeks still, isn't it? The Super Bowl. And then
Yep.
we'll take a short break, but we'll be back. Fantasy baseball preview, maybe some fantasy basketball stuff, and fantasy golf stuff. And then, of course, once the summer starts, NFL draft, free agency conclude, Spencer will be updating these rankings, and we will roll with you the whole time. Speaking of basketball, before we let you go, mid-season top 12, Spencer. I had to admit to you, I've fallen down on the job as a fantasy basketball owner in your league this year. I just haven't been able to keep up with it as much. But there's some surprising names on. I mean, usual suspects top 3, sure, 4 out of the top 5. But then you get some surprising names on here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I didn't realize it had gotten quite this shaken up because I mean I've been keeping up fairly close, but like I haven't looked at like the overall leaders in a while. So when I was looking through, I was like, man, look at all these new faces up here. This is a pretty wild year. Normally basketball is pretty chalk as far as the top 10 to 12. But yeah, a lot of new faces up there. Starting with Shea, I don't want to butcher his name there, Alexander with the Thunder. You know, the young guard there. They got him in the Paul George trade, and he's killed it, man. He's evolving in an elite point guard there for the Thunder. And the same with Tyrese Halliburton, another one that's burst onto the scene there in Indiana. It's funny, him and Domantas Sabonis were part of a last trade deadline.
Right.
The Pacers and Kings swapped them, and they're both putting up elite production. I got Sabonis on my team, and he's my top scoring person, because Joel Embiid, he's been really nice too. He was my first round pick. He was down there at 11. So, guys like him, LeBron, and, of course, the top 3, like Tatum, Doncic, and Jokic, of course, putting up their
those
numbers.
guys.
But
assuming they stay healthy, they're going to be the stars. Jerry's here. What's up, Jerry? He's late. I hope everything's well at the doctor. Good to see you, buddy. Finishing up the show here with some hoops rankings. It's interesting. I bet the Pacers over their win total early in the year, and it was only 22.5. They're already over it. I've already cashed that bet. I don't think I've been paid yet, and then the Jazz were 23.5. I bet that over. They need one more win. So some of these teams, people, they're going to tank. Well, the Jazz and Pacers, I mean, if the season ended today, I think would both be in the play-in tournaments. Like, they're not going to tank. So not at this point. So it's just interesting the way things can happen. The NBA, you think you have it. It's the one league you can kind of figure out, it's a stars league, so the stars are going to dominate, right? New stars are coming on the scene all the time. So, I mean, it is interesting. That's good to hear, Jerry, all as well. And I will ask you this, Spencer, because they're both out right now, but they are such possible, league winners, right? Which we're always talking about. Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram for the Pelicans. They're both expected back sometime in the next month. I mean, Ingram's been expected back for almost a month now. Zion, it was supposed to be 3 weeks, and that was about 2 weeks ago when he'd be reevaluated. So we'll see them back at some point, I would presume, in time for the fantasy basketball playoffs. What are you offering for those guys in a trade right now?
Yeah, I would feel better probably about trading for Zion than Ingram, man. Ingram's really starting to concern me. I don't understand why this toe thing is dragged out this long. It should have been back by now. It must be something more than they're, revealing, but it's like, it's just, man, I don't want to sound like Derry Downer here, but it's like, it's like eerily similar, like to Michael Thomas's deal, to where it was like, we don't know exactly what the deal is. So we're hopefully Ingram doesn't end up like that, to where he ends up having to have some season-ending surgery. But like, man, it's getting worrisome. So for the Pels' sake, I hope he comes back. But for fantasy basketball, I wouldn't trust him. Where Zion, I mean, he's risky, obviously, but when he's healthy, he's so dominant, to where if you can get him for the low right now, I'd definitely do so.
All right, so that is where we're at on the Fantasy Roundup. We'll be back with you next Tuesday, back on a regular day at 2 o'clock to discuss some conference championships, DFS, some player props, all of that good stuff we will have for you. And then we'll be back Super Bowl week. So looking forward to that. For Spencer the Guru, for our producer, Zoe Collins-Rath, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for joining us, everybody, here on the Fantasy Roundup. And 4 o'clock tomorrow, Bayou Bets, don't forget.